Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much, AC Hewitt and Chief Constable Hopkins, for everything that you and your forces have been doing throughout the pandemic. I want to turn to stop and search powers. I know that the Met Police has described stop and search as a vital tool that helped them to make a big indent on the murder rate in London throughout 2019. This was challenged quite vociferously by witnesses we had in front of the committee last week. One of them described the Met as addicted to stop and search, and another witness challenged those claims because he believed that obviously a lot of, or the majority of murders take place in a domestic setting, so he couldn't understand what evidence there would be to support such a claim. And I'm just interested in your views on both the effectiveness of stop and search and the evidence that underpins those views. Why is it thought to be so effective?
Okay, thank you. I can start and give a perspective, and then I think it probably would be useful from Ian to give a Greater Manchester perspective. I think there is for me, stop and search is, and it's not just simply about murders, particularly over the last number of years, we have seen significant rises in violent crime, and I think stop and search is a very legitimate tactic to allow us to be able to identify people that are carrying weapons. And whilst we do clearly focus, and you focused in your question on the murder, when we look at the serious violence and the injury and those that thankfully don't result in a fatality, it is really important to be able to be in those places where we know there is a prevalence of violence, where we know there is a prevalence of those individuals who are undertaking that violence, and being in a position to use stop and search as one of a number of tactics to be able to identify those people that are carrying weapons around the streets. So I do think it is a useful operational tactic. It is not the only operational tactic. It absolutely has to be built around the use of intelligence. So intelligence about individuals that are criminal, intelligence about areas where there is a prevalence of particularly violent criminality, and built in as part of an overall strategy to deal particularly with violent crime. I think it's really important when we talk about some of the developments that have emerged in over the years in terms of how we manage stop and search, and the use of panels and oversight groups which are present in every force to make sure that the way that stop and search is being used. Of course, the introduction of body-worn video has been really significant in terms of being able to have evidence and see how stop and searches are conducted. But equally, there is undoubtedly academic evidence that would suggest that you can't draw a direct causal link between stop and search and the reduction in some of the types of crime that I've described. And I think there is a range of academic opinion around that, but there are clearly some that would suggest that. But I think the important point for me is it is not a straight causal link that stop and search as a lone tactic is the one that will deliver success. I think it has to be seen as part of a broader range of tactics that you employ, particularly to tackle serious violence. And there has been some real progress in terms of reducing the levels of serious violence, and then ultimately, obviously, murder that goes with that as well.
Thank you. I'd like to just press you on the specific statement by the Met Police, if I may, because they specifically said that it was a vital tool that helped to reduce the murder rate in London by a quarter between 2018 and 2019. So from what you're saying to me today, am I right in thinking that that would be an operational judgment rather than something that's based on quantitative evidence?
I think so. Just to be really clear, it's not for me to answer for the Met specifically, but I can say, of course, it's an operational judgment. I think it's important they use the phrase in there, a tool, and that, for me, I think supports what I just said in the sense that this is not the sole cause. It is part of a range of the work you are doing in communities, the intelligence work you are doing, the proactive work you're doing to tackle those people that we know to be violent, the investigative work that we do once a violent offence has been committed. So it is part of a range of tools, and clearly all across the country, again in the different contexts in which people operate, police commanders will be making decisions about those operational tactics and tools that are likely to be most effective to deal with the particular problem that they face.
Thank you. And Chief Constable Hopkins, can I just ask, in Greater Manchester Police, how do you ensure that there is community confidence in your use of stop and search? How do you engage with BAME communities and others?
So there's a couple of things, and I think one of the things is that because of the rise in violent crime, our communities were actually asking for more stop and search to take place. We have a stop and search coordination group which involves senior leaders from my organisation, from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, community members, and 2 youth groups, one based in Broughton, in Salford, and one based in Moss Side in Manchester, and they meet quarterly with an overall aim of improving the use of stop and search. I also have an independent ethics panel which is chaired by the Bishop of Manchester, which we've had running since 2014, and they have scrutinised our use of force as well as stop and search on a regular basis. So those are the 2 sort of primary external facing things. Martin has touched on body-worn video, which is a really important tool for us in terms of transparency with those that are searched, but also giving greater community confidence about the way that we treat people who we're stopping and searching. And it is very much part of an overall package, and it is very much about trying to reduce violent crime. We don't have the same issues around murder as they do in the Metropolitan Police, but we do have significant issues, particularly in some parts of Manchester city centre, where violent crime using knives and knife-enabled crime, street robberies in particular, and we do a lot of targeted use of stop and search around that. So, I mean, we monitor it very closely. I've got May's figures, for example. I know that we did 820 stop and searches across Greater Manchester in May this year, and those sorts of figures go to those panels for them to scrutinise also. We've recently committed as well to doing a quarterly race equality report around use of force and stop and search for the Mayor of Greater Manchester, which will be a public document.
Thank you. And Assistant Commissioner Hewitt, if I could come back to you, what was the guidance issued to police forces around social distancing and the use of PPE when stopping, searching, or generally engaging with members of the public? Because we had some witnesses last week express concern that they hadn't seen officers wearing appropriate PPE when they did that. How did officers ensure that they were engaging with the public both in a way that protected the officers and also the members of the public with whom they were talking?
Yeah, so at the very outset of the COVID crisis, clearly the issue of PPE was going to be significant. We got to a place where we had very clear guidance from the Public Health England and the Health and Safety Executive, and then we also got to a place where we were able to ensure that all forces had sufficient PPE, and individually officers were able to deploy PPE where they felt that was appropriate. And ultimately, the decision then is a risk-based decision taken by individual officers when they are out and about and doing their work. Clearly, police work brings you in contact with people, and at times will bring you in very close contact with people when we need to do that. So it will be a matter for individual officers to take a decision around the deployment of PPE, because that's the only way you can manage that. But what was very, very clear, though, from the outset was that any officer or employee of a police service who was demonstrating any of the symptoms of COVID would report sick and would not come to work and would follow all the self-isolation processes that follow that. And then we very quickly were able to get ourselves into a situation where we were able to be able to provide testing facility as well. But ultimately, it is down to an individual officer making a risk-based decision, as they do with all their protective equipment, making a risk-based decision.
Thank you. And Chief Constable Hopkins, do you have anything you want to add from your experience throughout the pandemic?
So just in terms of the PPE and staff sickness, I mean, at one time, very early on, I had 2,000 of my colleagues, officers and staff that were either part of the shielding group or were self-isolating because they were symptomatic or a member of their family was. We were able, through the testing very quickly that was happening at Manchester Airport, to reduce that really quickly and get people in rapidly to be tested, which gave a degree of confidence. I mean, we did struggle to get sufficient PPE at the beginning of the crisis, but very quickly after that, we were able to procure large amounts of hand sanitizer in particular, face masks and gloves. It was slower coming through in terms of surgical masks. So the first sort of iteration of face masks that we were giving out were more like face coverings than actually ones that were waterproof and would have protected people. But as Martin said, it is down to individual officers. We gave them the guidance that was based on the guidance from Public Health England, and they had to make a situational judgment as to when to wear it. But definitely the self-isolation and the testing was a big part of our strategy.
Thank you. And my final question, AC Hewitt, there was a specific concern from our witnesses last week that forces had, I suppose you would say, unofficial internal targets to have high stop and search rates. I think there was a specific belief that the Metropolitan Police, it was attributed to one officer, a statement that they would do 30,000 stop and searches that month because they could. Can I ask what your response is to that allegation?
Well, I can't answer for the Met, as I say, but what I can say very clearly is that I would not in any way support a target around a number of stop and searches. Stop and search has to be conducted in a way that it is intelligence-led. It is dependent on the circumstances, and the power is there to be used, but it must be used based, legally and done appropriately. And that does not, for me, ever fit with having a target number that you are aiming to achieve.
Thank you. And Chief Constable Hopkins, do you ever find yourself under pressure as a force to have a high rate of stop and search, or is it left to you as an operational decision?
It's very much an operational decision. We do work in partnership with Greater Manchester Combined Authority and other partners such as education, the local authorities around our violent crime reduction work. It is a joint unit that we have. And actually a lot of our focus is on the prevention. So we do know that evidence will show that young people in particular that are carrying knives are more likely to be a victim themselves. So our work with schools around this is really important as well, and getting that message over to young people that they are putting themselves at risk. The only criticism I've had in recent years about stop and search has been that we haven't done enough of it over the last decade. So we have seen an increase in our usage, but not a massive increase, and I certainly wouldn't ever be pressurised into setting targets around stop and search. I think it would absolutely undermine our legitimacy with our communities.
Thank you very much. No further questions, Chair.
Thank you. And we're due to go on to Diane Abbott next, but Diane, I'm not sure if can you hear me? I think we've just got some technical... Diane, can you hear us? OK, we've got some technical problems we just try to resolve. So Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Chair. Officers, can I put on record our thanks for the job that you and your colleagues have been doing through a very difficult time. But that makes it all the more necessary that there is proper scrutiny and evidence availability. And on the fixed penalty notices, I do share the concern of the Chair that actually more data should and could have been made available. And simply saying that there's a complexity to understanding the data only gives rise to some of the criticisms that we heard last week. Now, you will have seen the session we held with 5 witnesses last week who were exceedingly damning, I have to say, in some of the comments that they made. And my concern was that many of those comments seemed to be made on assumptions and perceptions and were lacking in evidence. So can I just, in 3 quick areas, relay some of the allegations that were made for you to be able to respond to? That's demonstrations, use of tasers, and a little follow-up on stop and search. So firstly, on the policing of the demonstrations, we heard from Katrina French from Stopwatch. She said, "I did not see the public adopting as heavy-handed approach in the far-right demonstration as they did to the Black Lives Matter demonstration." She said, "In a sense, the police stood by and did nothing." She said, "When the far right are out, they are allowed to get away with what they want." Now, in terms of evidence, there were claims that the